Good afternoon and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland and this week's Full Scottish. My name is Hendry. On the programme this week, we're delighted to be joined by Rona Mackay, SNP MSP for Strathkelvin and Bearsden. Good afternoon, Rona.
Good afternoon, delighted to be here.
Good to see you too. And we're also delighted to welcome writer and activist and Broadcasting Scotland regular, William Duguid. Good afternoon, William.
Good afternoon to you, Drew, and welcome to yourself as a presenter.
Thank you very much. Well, we're going to start with the Middle East update today. At least 53,272 Palestinians have been killed and 120,673 wounded in Gaza since the 7th of October 2023. Israel has been accused of genocide and ethnic cleansing as it steps up attacks on Gaza. Israeli strikes have killed more than 300 people since Thursday, which, combined with the humanitarian aid blockade, is creating fears of famine in Gaza. So, Rona, what do you think of the situation, the stalemate that seems to be going on internationally over Gaza just now?
I mean, it's beyond horrific. And I think, most people who have to sit on the sidelines and feel powerless to do anything about this are just in despair. And I mean, the Israelis are literally starving and killing thousands of women and children. And you have to sit back and say, would someone please stop this? So I'm absolutely in despair every time you turn on the television, and it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And all the rhetoric from Donald Trump about, he's going to solve everything. And I mean, we knew it was nonsense, but I mean, it was an afterthought in his recent trip to the Middle East and Qatar. I mean, he just kind of added it in at the end. Oh yeah, that's a terrible situation, and moved on. It's really, really it's almost beyond belief what's happening out there now. And I can't believe that that nobody in power has been able to do anything about it. So yeah, I mean, words almost fail me on it, to be honest. It's terrible.
And William, what do you feel about the fact that international diplomacy just hasn't been able to make any kind of difference to the humanitarian suffering in Gaza?
It's quite remarkable that it's had so little impact. I think now probably a significant majority of the population see that this has to end, and it has to, the suffering has to stop, and would be in favour of anything that had achieved a sort of peace with justice. And yet, the leaders of the world don't seem to be able to make an impact on this situation at all. From Benjamin Netanyahu's perspective, of course, he constantly comes out with lines about maybe would be open to ending the fighting with the right sort of deal. And the right sort of deal invariably involves unconditional surrender. But more to the point, Benjamin Netanyahu needs this war for his own political survival. So he needs pressure to be put on him to make the prospect of not ending the war worse for him than the prospect of ending the war. And that's just not coming from the international diplomatic community. We have seen an increasing number of high-profile figures coming out with what appears to be more of a condemnation of what's going on. There's a lot of talk about whether it's a genocide, and I don't actually particularly care if the technical term genocide is used, although I know it's important, because what it is indiscriminate mass murder that will lead to the effective extermination of the people of Gaza. There's no getting around that, whatever title you call it back. I know international law requires some titles, but the truth of the matter is that, as we were saying just at the outset there, this is a failure of international law to make itself effective, and that's what we need to change.
Yeah. Thank you both. Well, it's day 1180 of the war in Ukraine, and Donald Trump will speak to Vladimir Putin on Monday to stop the bloodbath war in Ukraine, saying the conflict is killing thousands of soldiers a week and trade. Trump wrote on social media he would follow up the chat with Vladimir Zelensky So the war will end. The leaders of Germany and Italy have said that Europe is a long way from deploying troops in Ukraine as all efforts remain focused on an unconditional ceasefire deal with Russia. President Zelensky called for tougher sanctions on Moscow after a Russian strike on a minibus killed 9 people. Ukraine said the vehicle was evacuating civilians from a town in the Sumy region that has recently come under repeated Russian attacks. All the deceased were civilians, Zelensky wrote on X, and the Russians could not have failed to understand what kind of vehicle they were targeting. This was a deliberate killing of civilians, he said. The Ukrainian president has been meeting with other leaders in Rome as he appeals for support in the ongoing talks. On X, Zelensky said he's focused on a ceasefire, humanitarian commitments from allies, and efforts to rebuild Ukraine once the conflict ends. The US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, suggested that the Vatican could serve as a future venue for Russia-Ukraine peace talks, building on Pope Leo XIV's vow to make every effort to help ending the war. I think it's a place that both sides would be comfortable going, Rubio told reporters. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov spoke with Rubio, and he said he welcomed the positive role of the US in helping to continue talks between the Kremlin and Ukraine. However, Russia's lead negotiator invoked the Kremlin's past wars as it threatened the potential for a long conflict in Ukraine. We fought with Sweden for 21 years. How long are you ready to fight? Vladimir Medinsky is reported to have said about the war in Ukraine. And Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney reaffirmed the country's support for Ukraine in his first face-to-face meeting with President Zelensky. Carney told the Ukrainian president, "We underscore that there can be no peace without the full support and participation of Ukraine, and that you have our absolute support." The two met in Rome during the inaugural Mass of the newly elected Pope. So that conflict continues to rage, William, and we've heard lots of rhetoric about efforts for peace talks and for ceasefires, but still people are being killed in this conflict. What do you think of the current situation and indeed the international interventions by the likes of Trump and Putin?
Well, the international interventions are not yet proving completely effective. I've always had the suspicion with Trump that he replays the thoughts of the last person who spoke to him. So he might be replaying certain comments from Zelensky to Putin tomorrow, but more to the point, he'll be picking up more of the Putin lines and presumably then delivering them to Zelensky and said, we'll say once again, "Oh, you've got no cards, you must surrender." Zelensky is made of sterner stuff than that, and he is getting support now throughout the world. And I think Mark Carney's support is just an example of that. And we're seeing a wee bit more also from Europe and from the UK, but not yet anything that gives me any firm indicator that there's something going to be agreed. I think the two sides are just too far apart. And what we've got, and what is characterized by all the killing, is a war of attrition that could really drag on for quite some time yet. And I don't think that the Russians can necessarily overrun Ukraine, but at the same time, I don't think the Ukrainians can get the Russians off their land. And that is the stalemate, and that's why people are continuing to die.
And Rona, do you see that war of attrition that Williams just talked about continuing for some time, or do you see some hope of a breakthrough at some point?
No, I agree with really what William said, and I do think you have to have hope, but the characters involved in this, when you're talking about Trump and Putin, I mean, it just doesn't fill you with confidence that they're ever going to think about the wider picture and try to resolve this. It would all be just sort of saber rattling, etc., on their part. But as I say, you have to have hope that some good will come of it. And William's right. The European a community and leaders are, beginning to very belatedly, in my opinion, starting to think, we have to get behind Ukraine here. And it's great that Mark Carney's doing that, and he needs all the support. Ukraine needs all the support they can get, because it's pretty much David and Goliath fight that they're in. And I just have to say that, fingers crossed, that things go well. But I am cynical because of the players involved, I'm afraid.
Well, let's turn to domestic matters now. The Scottish Parliament passed Liam MacArthur's assisted dying bill at stage 1 on Tuesday in a debate which was thoughtful, passionate, and which was widely praised for showing the Scottish Parliament at its best. So, Rona, you would have been in the chamber. You would have witnessed a lot of these speeches and interventions, and some of the passion and thought on both sides of the argument. What was your impression of the standard of the debate, and indeed how the debate went?
Yeah, I mean, so it was an extraordinary afternoon. It really was a historical time, 5 hours in the chamber. I took part in the debate myself, and I was jumping up and down with interventions a lot. It was, it was as a debate should be. And as everyone knows, it wasn't a political debate. It was a free vote, so no one was whipped to vote in either way. And just impassioned views on both sides. I mean, I spoke strongly in support of the bill, and I'm the convener of End of Life Choices cross-party group. So we've been working on this for, many years, and you could see when Liam MacArthur gave his opening speech that he became emotional. And I think it was just the culmination of all the work and commitment that's been put in to get this bill right, get a tightly drawn bill with as many safeguards as possible. And it was all distilled down to 8 minutes for him and having to open it. And it was really, it was respectful. I mean, I think everybody respects others' point of view, but you have to speak your mind and how you absolutely feel about it. Some of my colleagues gave some very moving personal accounts of why they support the bill, and others who don't support it gave equally moving accounts. So it was, it was a good debate. I'm delighted at the outcome. 70-56 for stage 1, which we know is just the general principles, and then the detail now gets worked out before it goes to stage 3 to be actually passed into law, if it indeed is. So this is where everybody gets a chance to be part of it by putting their own amendments in, and it's going to be a lot of work. I just believe that people should have the choice. Basically, I don't think we have a right to take the choice from terminally ill people of how they leave the world. So I'm passionate about it, but I know others are too, in all different ways.
Before I turn to William, just staying with you, Rona, just for a second or two longer. It said that this showed the Scottish Parliament at its best. Do you feel there have been other debates that maybe didn't get the high level of attention that this one got, that might have been comparable in the past? Or was this quite a unique situation which actually brought out the best in people?
Yeah, it was unique. I mean, it's 10 years since Patrick Harvey brought forward Margot MacDonald's bill, and it hasn't got past the last 2 times. It's not got past stage 1, so there was no certainty that it would pass this time, and in the end, it did. So it was unique in that sense, and we very rarely have free votes in Parliament, as you know. So it was very unique. But there have been some incredibly important debates. Domestic Abuse Scotland, a bill in 2018 I was involved in, and it was emotional and passionate as well. And I could rhyme off a lot of debates that were game changing, I suppose you would say. This one stands out because it is so unique. Yeah, I mean, I think you can say it was Parliament at its best, and people were very invested in either listening or in speaking, and we'll see how it goes from here.
And so, William, what are your thoughts on the fact that this unit landmark bill came to the Scottish Parliament. It's passed its first reading. It has had that response, had a lot of thoughtful contribution. What are your thoughts about the fact that this is now passed and is going on to the next stage?
Well, I think it's encouraging. This is a very, very, very difficult subject, but I had a great sympathy with Patrick Harvey's bill when that made its attempt 10 years ago. I think it's when MSPs are speaking from the heart with their own personal conviction about a topic that matters and goes well beyond party lines. I think that's when you do see the Parliament at its best. I think when people are sticking to party lines on any topic, the bar for the Parliament being at its best can be quite low. But it's good to get through this first stage. Now the hard work begins, because there are obviously difficulties. Anybody who's had a relative or a friend who's been suffering in the later stages of life would be very sympathetic with the idea that it could be made easier for them to die at a time of their choosing, when that time is right and death is inevitable. But the safeguards need to be in place to prevent any form of coercion, and palliative care needs to be constantly looked at to make sure that it's always as good as it can be, because that's what gives people a genuine choice. If they know that one of the options might be for them to retain some quality of life because the palliative care is there for them, that in a sense makes it easier for them and they don't necessarily feel pushed into a corner. So I think the second stage will be interesting, and hopefully it will be conducted at the same level as this debate was, but there will be difficulties to be overcome. And I think we saw some of those in the UK Parliament's debate towards the end of the week, when I think there were some amendments that weren't brought forward and people didn't feel right about that. And I do think it's important that all aspects are considered and thought about, so that the final decision really does have the imprimatur of the Parliament as a whole really having thought about it and trying to do the best for the people that it exists to serve. So good first step, and fingers crossed for what comes next.
Can I just add?
Yeah, of course you can.
Sorry, no, I was just going to add the difference now. Obviously the bills from Patrick's bill the last time, this is different. It has a different safeguards, etc. in it, but we also have 10 years or more worth of international evidence to draw from, and that can't be disputed, what's happening in other jurisdictions and how things are working there. So I think Liam's been able to take that all into the mix and frame the bill around what works and what has been working successfully in other countries for, in the case of United States and Oregon and the United States, 30 years, etc. So I think that's a huge difference, is that we're not actually pioneers. This is legislation in many jurisdictions, and we see more and more Jersey, the Isle of Man, etc. all coming on board with their own bills. And so we're a small nation. I think we should be progressive enough, but I agree entirely with William. We have to take everything into consideration and make it, give people multiple choices. Palliative care, this is another choice, and it's I can't see an argument not to do it, but I know that other people feel differently. So I think we just have to weigh everything up for this very important next couple of stages.
Clearly an important and emotional debate and indeed result, and as you said, more to come. Let's turn to other domestic matters from the Scottish Parliament. In its response to the housing emergency declared over a year ago, the Scottish Government has highlighted measures it has taken to tackle the housing crisis, including £600 million worth of investment in affordable homes, with a further £768 million allocated in this financial year alone, along with actions to reduce temporary accommodation and bring empty houses back into use. William, is this enough?
Is anything ever enough? I think this is a substantial attempt to tackle the housing emergency within the constraints of the Scottish Government's powers. But there's a lot of underlying thinking that still needs to take place about how best to spend the money, and thinking about how perhaps the structure of town should be. Should we be, for example, looking at more central locations within towns than we currently are, although there are some good examples of that, for affordable social housing, something that's close to amenities, rather than pushing people out to the fringes. But principally, it's about the numbers, and we have a big problem with affordable housing. Not so much of a problem with difficult to afford housing, for which there always seems to be a huge supply, and it's getting that balance right. But always for a government with constrained finances, it's, as much as you can spare, but it's always just threatening to fall slightly short of the goal. So I just hope that we can spend it wisely, in the sense that we're efficient about how we use it. I mean, if you look at the example of the NHS, I think it's tremendously efficient in the way it uses its limited resources. So we have to look at both what we build, and also things like rent controls and how we introduce those, so that people can afford to rent if they can't afford to buy. And also we need to look at the most efficient way of looking after energy within houses, energy efficiency and insulation, so that their houses fit to live in. But it's not an insoluble problem for Scotland, because Scotland, at one time, the majority of housing was social housing. They weren't always good times, because there were quite a few slum areas that we needed to go through before things got slightly better, and we never get it absolutely right. But if we got back to a situation where there was a greater proportion of social housing within Scotland of a good quality, I don't think that would be a bad thing. I'm not sure I actually answered your question about whether it is enough, apart from my initial no, it probably isn't. But that's it from me on that one.
Well, talking about doing enough and what more could be done, William was talking about the financial situation there in terms of the resources available. What more could the Scottish Government be doing, Rona, without the borrowing powers which funded the post-war house building boom in Scotland?
Yeah, well, that's right, and I think now we're at the stage where a crisis has been reached in housing, and you can argue. I believe it all started with Thatcher's Right to Buy in the 80s, selling off social housing, and then no investment put back into to build more. And I think we'll have to look at all options. I mean, I really do, and I think we are doing. There's a housing bill going through Parliament just now. I'm not involved in it, so I don't know all the detail of it. But it obviously, part of it will be to look at other options, and to try and ease this crisis, because we absolutely have, people have a right to have a warm and affordable home. It's terrible that we see people living in conditions that you just can't imagine in this day and age people should have to live in. We have children in temporary accommodation, hotel accommodation, all that has to stop. And so I think we have to be radical in the way we bring forward new initiatives. As you say, it's a considerable amount of money that we're investing. But as William said, how much money would ever really be enough? So I think we have to be very creative and absolutely think out the box. And here in Eastern Bartonshire, Eastern Bartonshire Council in my constituency, their budget now, I haven't written down the figures, it's a substantial amount of the budget they are putting towards creating, and again, I can't remember the number, but it's a substantial amount of new socially affordable passive houses. So they're completely energy efficient. They will keep people's heating bills down, because energy, as you know, is just practically out of control energy costs. And it's a huge step forward. It's been a priority for our council. And we have to, I don't think anybody's under any illusion that we can just sit back and do nothing. I think radical things have to be done. Let's see what this housing bill brings, and and yes, it's an absolute priority that people have somewhere warm, safe, and energy efficient to live.
And William, do you think that at a time when obviously spending is being severely constrained at Westminster, so the consequentials for Scotland are lower than they might otherwise be, do you think borrowing powers would be a game changer if they were devolved to Scotland? In terms of
Well, they probably would be, but they won't be. One thing that might be possible, and it's not probably for the coming year, but I do believe it's within the Scottish Government's powers to replace council tax with something else that might raise more money in a more redistributive way, and might just, such as, for example, a form of property tax based on actual value rather than 1991 value, that might in turn slightly suppress the price of housing in any event, but might raise more money to be able just to start yourself on a virtuous circle, rather than just be struggling against constraints. And the other thing I think is that we need to look at really what housing is for. I mean, everybody really knows what it should be for, but what it tends to be used for is other things than that. What it should be is somewhere safe and warm when it needs to be, and cool when it needs to be, and secure place for people to live in dignity. And what it actually is in many cases is a corporate development opportunity, or an inheritance, or a savings account for middle classes, etc., etc. We need to get back to first principles for housing about what it's for. But maybe, as I said, there are other things we can do. And I don't want to sort of just leave that little grenade in there for Rona, but maybe about reforming council tax.
And I don't disagree. I don't disagree, William. That's something that's been on the agenda, as we all know, for many, many years. Never been able to get it off the ground. But I think there comes a time when I think that's an option we definitely have to look at and get agreement on.
Well, thank you both on that. Immigration is obviously regularly in the high headlines just now. I was a stranger and you did not welcome me. From the rivers of blood to country of strangers will be pandering to the far right on immigration to win back votes from reform. Or is this just normalizing far-right, racist, xenophobic policies? Rona?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Monday that Keir Starmer made his speech, and quite honestly, I was horrified, doesn't even cover it, to listen to his language and his rhetoric. It was straight from Nigel Farage's playbook. I mean, it really was. And he didn't even disguise the fact, using language like you've just quoted, Drew, and his whole message was clearly guaranteed to bring Labour voters back from reform. And really, that's horrible. It's playing politics with people's lives. The idea that we can only bring in skilled workers from other countries, siphon them off because we just want the best, is terrible. And the fact that care workers who we rely on, I mean, the NHS and social care would collapse if we didn't have care workers from abroad, and it makes no sense whatsoever. And I mean, I was a member of the Labour Party in the 1980s, and I don't recognise it anymore. I don't recognise this party or their policies or what their this government is saying. It's just unbelievable, and I don't even think they can. They certainly can't call themselves a socialist party, but they can't even. The name Labour doesn't apply anymore. It's just it's awful, and it made your flesh creep listening to that speech and the way it was delivered, and the actual meaning. When you dig down into what he was saying, what that will mean, it'll be disaster for not just Scotland, for the whole of the UK, of course. But yes, so I'm not impressed at all, and I think it's a very dangerous path to go down when you start trying to emulate, far right parties and their policies just because you think you're losing votes. You have to be true to your principles, and I don't think Labour are.
And Rona, what are your feelings about the direction of politics when it's being steered by issues such as immigration in these circumstances?
Well, I mean that's the really scary thing about it, because the vast majority of people are not terribly political or interested in politics, but they're disillusioned to a point. Now, when you speak to people on the doors and they say things like, it's time we got all the foreigners out of this country, you think, where did that come from? You'd be an immigrant if you look back far enough in your family tree. Where did that come from? And that's terrible, because that's what is, some people are believing and going along with. And actually, we saw from Brexit how damaging that kind of idea is. Scotland didn't vote for Brexit, but a significant number of people in the UK did. Clearly, we're out of it, and it's absolutely it's just been a disaster on all fronts, quite honestly. So when people come away with that, that's just them picking up sound bites, thinking my life could be better if. And it just doesn't work like that. So yeah, I find the whole thing actually pretty terrifying, and I think we need to start to rebalance and keep away. And I don't think Keir Starmer playing to the far right is doing that at all.
And William, talking about that playing to the right, we've seen the local elections in England return, a swathe of reform councillors, lots of councillors going to them. The direction of politics over the past few years in England's quite clearly been tracking to the right, and as we've seen with the reform, obviously to that harder right position now. It must be resonating, the messages must be resonating with some voters. What do you think the reasons are for that? And, just another add-on to that, do you think that there is, could you describe whether or not immigration does have some bad effects, or does it have some beneficial effects? So two questions really in that. What do you think? Why is it resonating, and what is the effect of immigration?
Well, first of all, it's resonating because people are utterly dissatisfied with both Labour and the Conservatives. And for some reason, and it makes no great sense, they seem to think that a party that's a limited company founded by millionaires and billionaires would be a solution to this. And the people who really have control of the media are quite good at spreading the message that immigration is a bad thing. And the fact that your life is going wrong in several levels in terms of the opportunities and the quality of life, that's because of immigration, not because of the billionaires. That's quite a pervasive message that really does soak into people. Now, it does soak into a minority of people, because even in England, where it's all very first past the post, thank you very much, it's still not a majority of people that cling to this view that reform is going to be the answer. I would further comment that they might know a wee bit more about reform once it's had charge of a few English councils, and some of them have rapidly unravelled. That process has begun with the urgent removal of some reform councillors even now. So that was my attempt at answering question one. I've temporarily forgotten what question two actually was. Could you repeat it and I'll answer it?
I should break them down more succinctly for you. So I'll ask you just to continue with this. I think the search for an answer as to why it's resonating. Is there a point about some immigration being a bad thing, or indeed is the fact that immigration is a good thing? What's your view on that?
Well, immigration is inevitable. The whole of human race has been a migrant at some point, pretty well. There might be some people in Africa whose forebears never moved very much from Africa, but the rest of us are undoubtedly, some way down the line, migrants. It's a natural part of human activity, and it's an inevitable part of human activity in the next 20 to 30 years. If climate change continues to hit hard, you will get large numbers of people moving from areas of the world that are rapidly becoming uninhabitable. So the fact it's an inevitability has to colour your view of whether it's good or bad. I mean, you almost have to be neutral on that score. Assuming everything were going to remain as it is, every country should have a policy about immigration that's to the benefit of that country, with a little bit for people who are inevitably asylum seeking and need to be given refuge. That there always needs to be everybody taking their share of that. But otherwise, it's quite valid for a country's immigration policy to suit what it needs. And that will typically mean what sort of population it needs to have, what sort of workers of what age it needs to have. And the calculation here may be different slightly in England. I don't think it's all that much different, but nevertheless, it may be different slightly in England. But undoubtedly, England needs people to do certain jobs, care workers, NHS amongst them, hospitality also. And they're not going to be getting them from what Keir Starmer and his pals are planning to do. And that's even more true of Scotland, because Scotland urgently needs people of working age. Our main immigrant population at the minute, I would suggest to you, is coming up into these not very easy to afford houses. They're coming up from England because they've been able to sell houses for much more, and they can come here. But they're not actually of working age, and they're not there for filling the jobs that need to be filled. And there is I think, unanswerable case for Scotland to have the powers to control its own immigration according to its own needs. And right now, for us, that means more immigrants. And it also means being able to fund the structures that allow those immigrants to assimilate and to become properly part of society. So that's maybe a kind of neutral answer to your question, but that's basically my view of it.
And Rona, what do you think that you mentioned the care sector earlier, and the fact that there are jobs we need to fill there. Are there other parts of the economy where we need to fill jobs with immigrants? And indeed, is this something that we've always done in Scotland, or is it something that's relatively new over the past few decades since joining the EU and then being taken out?
Yeah, I think we've always done it. I mean, Scotland is not full, and as William said, we desperately need workers. And I don't like calling care workers unskilled or low-skilled workers, because they're not. They're doing an essential job. We also, as William said, hospitality relies so much on people coming from other countries. We need, we do need, the technical skilled brains. That's true, but I would argue that to make that your kind of linchpin of, we're only taking skilled workers is quite disgusting, really. So yeah, I mean, I just think I don't know a society that's not better off for having immigrants in it. I think we should be welcoming families who want to come and live and work here and pay taxes. And Scotland certainly does need them. But as William says, we once again do not have the power to take those decisions, because immigration is not devolved to Scotland. And, and that's just a fact. Even if you were not trying to make it a political point, it's a fact that we can't do anything about that. And we desperately do need immigrants to come here and be part of our society, because we all were immigrants at one point. And I can't understand the mentality that would, the rhetoric that Keir Starmer uses. He doesn't talk, it's just numbers. He doesn't talk about, these are people's lives. These are individuals who just want the same as we all want, to have a comfortable standard of living, to bring up your family. And I don't know at what point, the humanity of this is gone. I don't know when it disappeared, but it definitely has disappeared. But I think we in Scotland have been consistent in saying we need people to come live and work here.
And what are your thoughts on William's point about the fact that the working age population is declining in some areas of Scotland? The numbers may be staying roughly the same, but the perhaps economically inactive people that are filling those spaces. Do we need more people to come and pay taxes? And indeed, what is the
undoubtedly,
net effect of immigrants?
I mean, I don't have the economic stats, and I'm absolutely certain that William's right. But the bottom line is, we do need working age people to come here and work in whatever area of their choosing, because if they're working, they're paying taxes, and that's going to help everything in our society. I don't want my children and grandchildren to grow up in a as probably used to happen in Scotland decades and decades ago, to grow up in a society where you only see, white Scottish faces. I want my children, grandchildren to see that the world's a big place and we can all live together happily, and stop demonising people coming in from other countries to our country, because, I mean, sounds cliched, but Scotland does welcome immigrants, and always has done, and it always will do. But unfortunately, we're tagged onto this, view that block the boats, immigration's a bad thing. No, it is not a bad thing, in my opinion.
And William, just coming back to that economically active situation, what kind of difference would that make for us in terms of the ability to invest in other social policies in Scotland if we're able to attract more people who are economically active into our workforce?
Well, it would make a big difference just in terms of growing the economy and growing the tax base. Of course, they have to be well-paid jobs, so there's a circle to be squared there. I think we're not bad in Scotland, actually, at living wage and real living wage situations, but there's always room for more. And I think people filling all sorts of roles at all sorts of pay levels can only be good, and can only help public services to work more effectively. I think it's a no-brainer, to be honest. And if we were independent, it's one of the first things we would do would be to work on who do we want as part of this country right now to be coming in to actually transform it into what it is capable of being. So yes, it's the way forward.
Well, let's move on to a subject which is very much linked to that and has had an effect, obviously, on the workforce. If being a member was the best deal the UK had with the EU, how far will Starmer's reset in EU relations go? If free movement and customs union is off the table, what can he achieve? Rona.
Well, I mean, I hope he achieves the absolute best that he can do. As we said earlier in the programme, and in my view, Brexit's been a complete disaster. We should never have been taken out of Europe against our will as a small nation. And we're now sort of scrambling to see, how can we get back into the club and get the best of it? Scotland, as an independent country, would make that a priority, and I believe would be welcomed with open arms back into the European Union. But Keir Starmer's doing his duty by trying to get a deal. As I understand it, I think this morning one of the government ministers in the UK said that no deal had been done, but they were trying to iron out this sort of haggle with the finer detail. And I don't know what that is, to be honest. I'm not up on the actual detail of what this might achieve for us. But I mean, I do know. I mean, already the right wing press. I noticed some headlines this morning. They're calling it the Surrender Summit. The Surrender Summit, the EU UK, which is just unbelievable. That's the way they see it. Don't give in to these foreigners. However, let's hope that something can be achieved. And I think, it's more important than ever now that we should be in Europe, because with everything that's happening with Trump and Putin and the right wing, the Farage party. I don't even like to call it reform. I'd rather just say the Farage party, because reform has different connotations. But they're so anti-Europe, and we're seeing the effects of that, which have proved to be absolutely terrible for the economy, and just terrible for international movement, for young people who can no longer go abroad and study. It's just been an absolute criminal act. And on a much lighter and much more trivial notice, I'm currently going through bureaucratic red tape hell trying to get my dog over to Ireland in summer. All of a sudden now dogs have to have animal health certificates, which, it's just nonsense. It's so bureaucratic and expensive, and I'm not complaining about the money part of it. It's just the amount of red tape that my beautiful golden retriever has to have a rabies jag. It has to have all sorts of other treatments, and it has to have checks and that. I mean, it's I couldn't begin to tell you how complicated it seems to be, and all for what? Just nonsense, So that's obviously a minor point, but by and large, the summit, again, we have to have hope that something good comes out of it, but we'll wait and see.
And do you think, Rona, that the impact of that red tape that you've just described on one issue is being replicated across lots of other different situations, and it's actually forcing some action from the UK government? Or do you think this was something that they wanted to do anyway? And William, I'll come to you in a wee minute to talk about some of the economic stuff.
I'm not sure a lot of Labour voters did vote for Brexit. So again, they're trying to walk this line of appealing to everybody and keep their voters. But I think the global picture has changed so much that they have to be seen to try and get something. And obviously with Trump's tariffs and everything, that's made a difference to them. But I think it's important that we stand strong with Europe, and I just regret that we're no longer in the inner circle for that. And I know I've spoken to businesses, local businesses and otherwise, who say it's been very damaging to them. That sometimes they just don't export to Europe now. They can't, they can't do it because of the amount of red tape that's involved. Just meaningless things that add to the cost and add to the hassle of actually doing business. So we knew this would happen, and it is proving to be so in all sorts of ways that, it seems like everything. It's been a wee while since we come out of Europe now, and it seems like you kind of know, and then somebody will drop in a fact. Is that right? Do you have to do that? And so I find it astonishing that, we're in this situation, but I do hope that something comes out of this summit.
William, it's been reported that the UK is losing £100 billion a year from Brexit at the moment. Do you think the inability to grow the UK economy is forcing some discussion about how we can take forward more trade, a more closer relationship into the future? Is that at the root of this, or is it just paying lip service?
Well, it may or may not turn out to be paying lip service because of what may or may not be achievable. But I think people are talking about a kind of three-part jigsaw to, quote, unlock growth. And there was the deal with the US, which actually is not that much of a deal yet because so many of the blanks still need to be filled in. There was the one with India, which is rather smaller than it's purporting to be. And now there's the talks going to happen with the EU as well. And what is actually going to be achievable? Well, the question you have to ask yourself really is, if a country theoretically could leave the EU and then a few years later do a deal with the EU that was effectively the same as having been in the EU all along, what would be the point of the EU as it currently exists? Whatever we do is going to be a worse deal than the EU was. And the question is whether it's a deal we can live with ultimately, and this will be the first set of talks in a long series of talks, I'm sure, or at some point are we going to conclude, well, actually the only way to get everything we want and need, and I'm thinking really about things like freedom of movement, real freedom of movement, if we feel that that is a priority and voters feel that it's a priority, and in the case of the Labour Party, the focus groups feel it's a priority, then we would have to be looking at getting back into the EU. As things stand, I will be happy if we have slightly better and improving dialogue with Europe. I think the EU lost trust in the UK because of all the games that Boris Johnson and his pals played around Brexit. We obviously need a bit of a security and defence pact. That's been coming for a while, and the succession of talks, but that needs to continue because increasingly the EU and Europe itself, they're going to be a strong bloc in and of themselves. Trump's tariffs have been a motivator in getting this going, for sure. And well, let's just see how far it goes. Food and drink, I would like to see something done on that, because at the moment, red tape is causing a lot of food to be thrown away because it's taking just too long to get it to where it needs to go. But let's not ask for the moon when we have the stars. If we can be talking to the US, sorry, to the EU, and things start to get better, that's a beginning of something that might go on a wee bit further. And maybe we should keep our fingers crossed and watch reform fulminating from the sidelines, with the press coming out with headlines about surrender and all that sort of utter nonsense, and hope that Labour don't get swayed by it at any point.
There's talks, William, of reciprocal deals for young people and the ability to go and live and work and study in the EU, as in similar ways with other international countries. Do you think those kinds of deals will ever replace the freedom movement that young people have experienced for the decades that we were members of the EU, or will it just be a little bit extra?
I think it'll be a little bit extra. I think we've got probably a few, maybe a dozen or so youth mobility schemes of one sort or another on a sort of bilateral basis at the moment, and it will be building on that. I mean, youth mobility is an enormous part of what used to be the freedom of movement thing, and we'll never get all of that back unless we have the full Monty as far as the EU is concerned. Musicians and their ability to tour is another one, and they don't all tend to be young nowadays, but it's the same sort of idea. So, if you leave the big group, then you're doing everything piecemeal, and it's an awful lot of work for slightly inferior results, and that's the infuriating thing about it. And in the meantime, the amount of money we have lost or foregone through not being in the EU continues to stack up. And certainly I think that were Scotland to become independent, we would want to have some sort of pre-joining deal with the EU as soon as we could. We might well have to put it to the people of Scotland about whether they wanted actually to go back into the EU or some other arrangement. But actually, I think a majority of Scots would right now vote to go back into the EU, but cover ourselves with some sort of pre-agreement and get at least the same level as the UK has got now. And I think we could do that, because I don't think it's actually going to be as great as all that, certainly not for a few years.
And Rona, what do you think the impact of Brexit has been on young people and their ability to be able to travel and work and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I really despair of it, Drew, I really do. I mean, my son benefited when he was at university of going to Nijmegen in the Netherlands for a year, which has been, apart from the academic benefit of it, it's just been a huge, a positive experience for him, made friends he'll keep for the rest of his life, all that kind of thing. Two of my nephews who are a bit younger and are at university, they'll not get that chance, and it just does not make sense. I think young people have, this is they are the future, and we have, or rather Scotland hasn't, the rest of the UK have denied them the best that they can be by having these opportunities. So they're the ones that I really despair for. And, all the points about businesses, facing these extra challenges and barriers, it should not be like that. It just shouldn't be like that. And I think that, the longer time goes on, we're realising the downsides that we hadn't even anticipated. Yes, we knew it was going to be bad, but I think as the details now emerge, we are, we're in a bad place. So if we can, somehow get something back, then that would be good. And I would like to see that happen for young people who are growing up. Incidentally, I've just seen a press release, Michael Gove saying that Scotland should have an independence referendum if that's the will of the people. So I'm not sure if Michael's just sort of desperate to make headlines and he's saying these things, or if he truly believes it. But either way, it's an interesting comment coming from him, particularly.
He's flying a kite.
Yes, I think
perhaps,
I think that's right. I think that's it. It's not April Fool's Day, is it?
yeah, we'll perhaps leave Michael go for another time.
Yeah.
Just that, continuing on this subject, because I'm interested to follow through with you, Rona, about what William was saying about musicians, perhaps some of them young at heart rather than actually young, and their ability to be able to get across the EU and perform. Is this a symptom of one of the things that we're really missing out, that ability to expand Scotland's cultural reach because of the restrictions? And should that be a priority for Starmer?
Oh, I think it should be one of them, definitely. I mean, I think it's so important that our creative community can go abroad, and without hassle, and for the life of me, I can't see why anybody thinks it's good to restrict people in that way. Scotland's got such an amazing cultural heritage, whether it's music or acting or, creative writers, people. And why would you restrict them and make it very difficult for them and sometimes impossible for them to actually go and work abroad? So yeah, I think it's got to be one of the priorities. And you're right, it's not all young people that do that. There are some older people that have been doing it for years, and why stop them? So I'm really keen that we try and limit the damage as much as we can, until, as an independent nation, we get back into the EU. And I'm the optimist, so I'm hoping that will happen. Hopefully in my lifetime, but certainly in my children's lifetime.
And William, just a final thought for you. What should be the priority in these discussions that we're having, that the UK government are having with the EU at the moment?
The priority should be building the relationship and making it into a rapidly improving one. And I think the food and drink side of things, and keep an eye on fishing, where the deal runs out in about a year's time. The fishermen felt they were used as a bit of a bargaining counter around about 2020-21, and there might be hopes that they're not. There is the view that the deal should be extended. It's just a case of the UK just wants to do it for 4 years and Brussels wants it for longer. I would like to see that getting resolved fairly sharpish before it turns into a crisis next time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Well, that's it for this week's Full Scottish. Before I go, I just want to remind you that Broadcasting Scotland depend on the generosity of their supporters. To everyone who's donated and to everyone who's signed up to make a regular payment, thank you very much indeed. We were £16,000 short of our funding requirements in 2024, which has left us short of the money we need to pay all of our bills. So we face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only received donations of around £2,500. We've raised £9,500 this year so far, £7,000 less than we need to be on target to pay our bills every month, and we urgently need to raise as much of that £7,000 as possible immediately. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month or more, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and please donate whatever you can afford to donate. So thank you for watching today, and thank you again to our guests, Rona Mackay and William Duguid. Goodbye, and thank you all for watching.